Rising global temperatures have a direct impact on food security. According to the World Food Programme, we are witnessing an unprecedented food crisis. Now, over 780 million people around the world are facing chronic hunger. Welcome to Eco Africa. I am Sandra Kahumza Twinobudio, right here in Kampala, Uganda.
Diversifying food sources and agricultural production techniques is one way of ensuring safe and healthy food for everyone. I am Chris Alems, coming to you from Lagos, Nigeria. Good to have you with us. Here's what's coming up. Why mushrooms are big business in Rwanda. How to reduce the environmental impact of online shopping. And how school children are learning the satisfaction of growing their own food. But we start the show on the South African coast. Jellyfish have been thriving for millions of years and are among the oldest living animals on the planet. But even though they've been around for so long, there's surprisingly little research into these elusive marine creatures. Now scientists are trying to find out more about them and the critical role they play in ocean ecosystems.
Jellyfish are among Earth's oldest inhabitants. Mass occurrences, known as blooms of jellyfish, happen roughly every 10 years. But in some regions, like along the Namibian coast, they seem to occur more frequently. But it's hard to get data. Jellyfish drift with the current, which makes them difficult to accurately record. Such invasions are usually the result of environmental conditions which lead to a drop in the number of predators.
At the same time, that can be facilitated by an increase in temperature. You increase the temperature, these things will grow faster. You drop the concentrations of oxygen, that will affect fish negatively, but it doesn't affect jellyfish. So jellyfish will thrive in areas that fish have been forced to abandon.
The invasion has not yet hit South Africa. Chris Lewis is a jellyfish expert who is familiar with the species in the waters off Cape Town. So far, 20 species are known here, such as the frilly-mouthed jelly and the poisonous box jellyfish. Researchers are only now beginning to understand the role that these invertebrates play in the marine ecosystem.
They not only serve as an indicator species to show us when an ecosystem is out of whack, but they also play a very important role as a prey species, as well as predators in the ocean. And because jellyfish are predators, they actually lock up a lot of carbon into the ocean. And when those jellyfish die, they actually sink to the bottom of the seafloor. And then the following season, with wind-induced upwelling, that nutrients get reused by the phytoplankton in order to grow and start that cycle back again.
There's a lot more to learn about species diversity too. Verena Russ has spent just over a decade studying jellyfish. Together with other scientists, she wants to build a database of the different types found off the South African coast to determine whether there are any changes in their numbers. But it's a huge task.
We get small bits of tissue, we extract the tissue, we get the DNA out of the tissue, and all that's left is this little solution filled with DNA. What we then do is we sequence the DNA and we look at what species we are seeing based on the DNA. And what I can say is we are seeing many, many new things coming up from our collections. We've only maybe worked through about 10% of our collections, and already we are discovering many, many new species. And so this has been very exciting for us.
The more the researchers understand about jellyfish types and their numbers, the better they can determine changes in the population and correlate them with climatic conditions. Jellyfish certainly seem to feel at home here, as the coast of South Africa is one of the most species-rich in the world. Around 10% of all jellyfish species live here, and many can be seen at the Cape Town Aquarium. Each species has its own peculiarities, with some only living in cold water, others in warm. Chris Lewis is responsible for breeding them.
It's a complex and difficult task. Each species has its own parameters. So while they're growing up, some species want to live in warm or cold water for certain periods of time. Their diet shift. We have some jellyfish that eat other jellyfish, so we actually have to produce enough jellyfish in order to feed them. Then also, some jellyfish aren't very long lived. They live for 6 months or 9 months. So we always need to have this conveyor belt system where we're actually growing new species to replace the ones that are actually expiring on exhibit. as well as the flow in the tanks. The ocean is very good at keeping the jellyfish healthy, but as the jellyfish grow in the tanks, we actually have to adjust the flow so they can grow optimally. Else the jellyfish become very misshapen and they actually die and perish because of that.
Many people are fascinated by these aquatic dinosaurs, or fear them, because many jellyfish are poisonous, although only a few species are dangerous to humans. Some jellyfish also contain hyaluronic acid and important nutrients like proteins, making them a popular food in Asia. But they're not on the menu in South Africa yet. Instead, scientists here hope to better understand the role of jellyfish within the marine ecosystem and how it's affected by climate change.
From one ancient sea creature to another, have you ever heard of the term keystone species? Well, it's an organism that helps hold an ecosystem together. Oysters are one example.
That is right, Chris. They are known as ecosystem engineers because they help create new habitats for other species, and they also minimize the impact of climate change. Tiny as they are, oysters are real power players, so we need to protect them.
This oyster and these mussels, along with scallops and clams, are bivalves, ocean creatures with 2 attached shells. Fossil records place their age at over 500 million years old, before the dinosaurs. And they are found everywhere, from the Arctic to the Antarctic to the equator. They start out tiny, floating through the water. Oysters and mussels attach themselves to an underwater surface to grow, while clams bury themselves in sand. They come in all different shapes and sizes too. They used to be so plentiful that they were given out as free bar snacks, but overfishing caused populations to decrease.
About 85% of shellfish reefs worldwide have been lost.
Heidi Alloway did her PhD on the history of oysters and mussels.
We've had this extreme loss of a highly productive habitat from so many places in the world, and people didn't even know that it had happened.
The more we learn about how valuable they are to ecosystems, the more devastating this loss becomes. That's because they do some incredible stuff. And all by hanging out in the water. Wherever they grow, they're busy cleaning, because the majority of bivalves are filter feeders.
They filter water and catch particles in that water, so feed on those particles.
Sergei Katsev researched how mussels are controlling the ecosystem of the Great Lakes in the United States.
If you can imagine a mussel sitting at the bottom of the lake, maybe in 200 meters depth, and you imagine that water column 200 meters above that mussel. That single mussel can cycle that column of water in a couple of hours.
They use whatever particles they need to grow, and excrete the rest in a form that bacteria on the bottom can break down. As you can see on the left, they filter chemicals necessary for plant and animal growth, phosphorus, and nitrogen. These chemicals are present in agricultural runoff from fertilizers and can cause toxic algal blooms at high levels. Bivalves also filter more than just chemicals. Pilot projects are using them to clean lakes and oceans of microplastics, tiny plastic particles hard to see and collect. The bivalves absorb the small ones, and larger particles are excreted in feces, which can then be taken out of the water. So we can use these animals to clean up polluted water, but in a closed environment, they can alter the whole ecosystem. That's what the researchers discovered in the Great Lakes. The mussels aren't native to this area and have cleared the water of nutrients too well.
It was quite a realization to figure out that mussels that live at the bottom of the lake have this large effect on the biology of the entire lake.
In the open ocean, it's a different story. Here, mussels and oysters can form reefs able to support whole ecosystems. Oysters are particularly good at this.
Over time, these structures grow bigger and bigger, and they are very complex.
Katie Mosher works for the Billion Oyster Project, which aims to restore 1 billion oysters to New York's harbor by 2035. As the oyster reefs grow, ocean plants attach to them, which attracts small fish and other animals.
They become a nursery and a feeding ground for all different kinds of organisms. So hundreds of other species, fish, crabs, little tiny benthic organisms will make their home on an oyster reef.
These reefs also support other larger animals. A study on New Zealand mussel reefs found over 10 times as many fish near them, and seahorses have returned to the oyster reefs in New York Harbor. Their benefits also extend beyond the structures themselves.
What those oyster reefs are doing is actually protecting the integrity of the broader ecosystem.
When a powerful wave comes in from the ocean and hits an oyster reef, some of the energy is broken up and lost, meaning the waves that pass that reef aren't as damaging. Near the shore, this protects fragile coastal ecosystems, like seagrasses, which function as nurseries for ocean animals and as carbon sinks. Less wave energy also means less coastal erosion. And these ecosystem benefits can also come from farms, if they're sustainably managed.
Having mussels inside any ecosystem is very beneficial.
Bokamosola Bepe works with mussel farmers in South Africa to make sure their operations are as sustainable as possible.
Those sustainable fishing practices are, for example, trying to ensure that we minimize our interactions and impacts with endangered, threatened, and protected species.
Mussels are hung from ropes suspended in the water that animals could become trapped in. But with the ropes properly anchored, it's extremely rare that this happens.
We're also trying to ensure that the mussel farms themselves do not have a big impact on the benthic habitats that they operate over.
In a closed environment like this bay, excrement from the mussels could cover the ocean floor, so platforms are rotated to make sure they don't overwhelm ecosystems. Bivalve farms require no feed and no antibiotics, as they get everything they need from the water. Rope-grown mussels have a carbon footprint of 0.25 kilograms per kilo. For comparison, beef is around 100 kilograms per kilo. And unlike other methods of food production, waste products from mussels and oysters can be reused in a circular way.
Farmers that we're working with now, they're working with a third-party operator who actually uses the leftover shells to actually make organic compost out of them.
As building material, the shells also sequester carbon. Bivalves pull it from the water and use it to grow their shells. Crushed up, the shells can be added to concrete instead of limestone. But the best use for the shells is the simplest: growing more bivalves. Old shells are often reused for farming, but can also go to restoration projects, where the shellfish are left in the water instead of eaten. These projects are springing up around the world, from Australia to New York City.
We've collected almost 2 million pounds of shell already.
The shells are cleaned and placed in cages.
These oyster cages are put into shipping containers that we've converted into a way to set oyster larvae onto shell.
Add water from the harbor, then some larvae, and after a week there are baby oysters. The cages are then moved into the harbor. As the oyster reef grows, it creates an ecosystem, while also benefiting people on shore.
We can expect a ton of fish per hectare of oyster reefs to be added to the marine environment through a restoration process.
So while more bivalves generally mean cleaner waters, the positive impact of mussels and oysters can be doubled through circular uses for their shells. And of all of them, oysters are the superheroes: filtering, sheltering, protecting, and restoring. That's why we should be doing everything we can to put more of them in our waters.
There is one thing that we can all do that means we never have to worry about the scarcity of the cost of fruit and vegetables. In our next report, we visit a school right here in Uganda where the young students are repurposing plastic to grow their own food.
Fresh from the garden as you see, the spinach and the cabbage. We're going to the kitchen to prepare them for our lunch.
The young farmers of St. Kizito High School are successful. The produce from their school farm is used to feed their entire student population. The students at the school on the outskirts of Kampala already grow vegetables such as cabbages, raise chickens, and farm their own fish. Now they're collecting waste plastic bottles that they use to build vertical gardens in various forms and make the most of the remaining growing space.
In this, it helps us in a way that we plant a lot of different plants in it. We have the skuma witch in it, we have the tomatoes, the chili. You know, if you have a small environment at home, some of us have poor background, but through this, it can help us in a way. It takes a little space.
One bottle building has a rooftop garden with mushroom cultures and waste cotton husks for soil inside. The harvested mushrooms are sliced and dried for storage.
This is simply an ecological way of using our space in the environment, whereby we're trying to avoid all the different forests cut down, all the different trees dying. We don't want this in the environment anymore, we are tired of it, and we have come up with a solution.
Through the projects, the students are learning innovative, eco-friendly and sustainable growing practices, how to be self-sufficient, and how to guarantee a healthy diet.
From Uganda, we head to Rwanda, where farmers are also cultivating mushrooms, but on a bigger scale than those school children we just met. And they believe fungi are the answer to many of the world's problems.
Who would have thought? Well, demand is definitely growing, and mushroom farming is quickly becoming one of the most lucrative agricultural activities in Africa.
In the dark, humid interiors of this hut, Semagambo Evarista is cultivating a crop that helped improve food security in Rwanda: oyster mushrooms.
Maze imyaka 5 mpinga ibihumyo. Iyo uhinze ibihumyo byera vuba.
I have been cultivating mushrooms for 5 years. Their rapid growth sets them apart from other crops. Between 9 and 15 days after cultivation, the mushrooms are ready for sale. With other crops, you often have to wait 5 to 6 months before they can be harvested. But with mushrooms, you're generating revenue within just 2 weeks. They have many advantages over other crops.
Bidasaba ahantu hanini, iyo tubihinze tubona umusaruro kandi ahantu hatoya.
Semagambo Evaristas grows his mushrooms in Rugurami village, one of 15 villages supported by Kigali Farms. It's trained around 700 smallholder farmers and had the hut specially built, which the farmers use for free. It also provides them with production and commercialization assistance. The social enterprise was set up by Lauren Demonic in 2010. Previously, he ran a microbrewery in New York, but he wanted to move to Africa to do something sustainable with a community impact, and then inspiration hit.
A book called Mycelium Running: How Mushrooms Can Help Save the World. And I thought, yeah, that's too much. You know, how can mushrooms save the world? But I started reading the book, and I was very quickly convinced that mushrooms are these incredible organisms that can do a lot of good things if you use them in the right way. They can be good for people's health. They're very healthy to eat. They're very nutritious. They can be very good for the environment because they have a tendency to recycle organic matter into something useful.
The agronomic conditions in Rwanda are ideal for the cultivation of several varieties of mushrooms, and the crop is an ideal solution to one of the problems the country faces: the growing population, which currently numbers around 14 million, and the limited availability of arable land, which encompasses some 1.4 million hectares.
This indicates that our current land resources may not adequately ensure food security for all citizens in the future. However, we should still seek viable solutions. Mushrooms play a significant role in the circular bioeconomy. It solves the issue of negative effects of crop residues in the long term.
That's because it's used as a substrate from the mushrooms. Kigali Farms provides support to local wheat farmers when they harvest, and then buys their wheat straw, which is then fermented into substrate. In the past, the farmers would have burned their crop residue, contributing to air pollution.
In the countryside is where you find more agricultural waste that can be converted into mushrooms. So we started with that, and then 5-6 years into it, we started with button mushrooms. Now, button mushrooms worldwide is the #1 commercial mushrooms everywhere. It's 90% of the cultivated mushroom around the world, but it was 0 in Rwanda, and it's very, very low in Africa.
Requiring minimal inputs in terms of costs, land and labor, Mushroom farming is benefiting local communities here in Rwanda, as well as helping decrease emissions and improve soil quality.
My passion for mushroom farming stems from the many benefits it's given me. The growing cycle takes around 3 months, but even once it's finished, mushroom substrates retain residual value. We can use it as high-quality manure, which is ideal for various crops, especially vegetables, so the harvest is good. As manure, it's much better than other fertilizers, which degrade the soil quality.
What's more, mushrooms are increasingly seen as an affordable and healthy food, and a much more environmentally friendly source of protein than meat.
Instead of having your hamburger with beef in it, you can have a vegetarian burger with the mushroom in it. That's just as delicious, much healthier for you, and much healthier for the planet.
Mushroom farming fits well with the Rwandan government's plans to make agriculture climate smart.
We aim to integrate climate-smart agriculture into our agricultural policy. We will promote sustainable and environmentally friendly farming methods. We aim to support all forms of agriculture or farming that generate organic fertilizers. This approach not only aids in combating the impacts of climate change, but also diversifies our reliance beyond mushrooms.
With its many benefits for the environment, mushroom farming is helping Rwanda meet its target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 40% by the end of the decade.
Believe it or not, mushrooms are also being used as a basis for a sustainable alternative to plastic packaging. That's urgently needed as online shopping continues to boom. The packaging problems get worse and worse. Our next story takes us to Romania in Eastern Europe, where one startup came up with another way consumers can keep buying online without adding to the waste problem.
You order online, and a few days later, the mailman brings everything right to your doorstep. The boxes that pile up are a necessary evil.
All these boxes make the home look so messy. We felt that needed to change, and we came up with the idea of developing a better packaging solution.
Last year, global parcel shipping volume amounted to over 161 billion parcels. It takes 2 kilos of wood to produce 1 kilo of packaging paper, and that means a lot of trees had to be felled to make those parcels. Adina Huma's startup designed a returnable packaging solution that can be reused up to 500 times. Today, consumers shopping online can opt for environmentally friendly packaging with just one click. Once the packaging has been removed, it's returned to the courier and sent back, a service for which customers pay extra.
More and more online customers want to have returnable packaging.
The challenge for the startup is finding as many companies as possible to take part in the system. This large online bookseller with branches throughout Bucharest is already on board. Normal cardboard packaging is wasteful. We don't want to put more cardboard on the market. It usually ends up in landfills. Adina Huma hopes that more and more online shoppers will opt for returnable, reusable packaging.
We Romanians still have a lot of catching up to do, and we need to educate the public. For years, we had to explain the difference between reusing and recycling, but we kept at it. And now people understand how the conservation of resources works.
The European Union's Green Deal plans on making the EU climate neutral by 2050. Adina Huma thinks Recreate's returnable packaging solution is a highly promising one. She just wishes she'd had the idea sooner.
That's it for this week's show, all about climate-smart solutions to fighting food insecurity and protecting the planet. I'm Chris Elems, and it's goodbye from me in Nigeria.
And I am Sandra Kahumza Twinovideo, signing off from Uganda. Thank you for joining us, and do check out our Eco Africa online platforms for more great stories, or write to us at eco@dw.com. See you again very soon.